Hi guys, it's Hoovian Central here, and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be looking at the underrated stories for each Doctor, so like their hidden gem or underrated story. I think that these just are some of their better stories, but they just don't seem to get mentioned when you're talking about that kind of like era. And so, because obviously there's so many Doctors, I'll do the first part, which will be obviously classic, so it'll be 1-7. And then I'll do the second part, which it'll be New Who, so 9-13, I suppose. So, yeah. So let's get started off. First off, with First Doctor, it's the Keys Marinus. So Keys Marinus was in my top 10 classic episodes. And I think the reason I like the episode so much isn't because it's flashy or there's cool villains or anything. It's the fact that it just works as a story, and it also works in the sense that it feels like the companions get to do something. I feel like it because in some of the newer stories in New Who, like, I don't know, like especially 13th Doctor, I suppose. Some of the 13th Doctor stories feel like it's just the Doctor doing everything, saving the day, and the companions are like there to admire her doing everything or admiring him doing everything right. However, Keys Marinus is great because in one point, I can't remember exactly when he leaves. I think it might be in the second or third part. In that part, I think it might be the second part actually. In the second part, the Doctor just goes, I'm going, because I'm just going to go to this bit. I'm going now, bye. And then he doesn't appear again until like the fifth part. And that's because they have this kind of like thing that's going to jump them to different places because they need to find the keys for Marinus, obviously. I also like it because it feels like the key to time, but it makes it a bit simpler. Because like with the key to time, when you watch Key to Time first time round, you make your opinions. The second time round, it's a bit difficult to go, oh well, I don't really want to watch whatever Ribos Operation again. But this one's a lot easier because if you don't want to watch the second part of this story, it's only 20 minutes, so you can kind of watch it. I also think Ian and Barbara are very good in this one. But yeah, moving on to the second one, the second Doctor, and this is a story is the Seeds of Death, and this is a story that I find is when you're talking about second Doctor stories, I normally hear things like, War Games, obviously, Team of the Cybermen, Power of the Daleks, and although yes, he's very memorable for his Cyberman stories, especially his stuff in Invasion, of course, and Tomb of the Cybermen, even the Moon Base, but that's possibly most of it's probably his underrated one. I never hear anything about the Ice Warriors, because I swear everyone goes, oh yeah, the Ice Warriors, the New Who, like in Cold War and Empress of Mars, which I think are pretty alright stories. People go, oh, they're not the best stories, but then I never hear anyone talk about the old ones. I mean, because people mention them in Cursed Peladon and Monster of Peladon, but nothing to do with the Seeds of Death, which I think is probably the best Ice Warrior story. Not because it's a 6-part or it goes in particularly in depth. I just think the Doctor, Zoe, and Jamie are really good in this episode. They work well together, and it just seems quite like a fun story and quite an interesting story. And I also love the fact that Zoe seems to know quite a lot because she's from the future, and it's quite funny to see them going like, oh, the Doctor and Zoe know a lot, but then Jamie's just they're saying Jamie's like a bit stupid, which I thought was quite funny from the people in the future. I also I love the scene where he goes, you can't kill me, and then he says, because I'm clever, or because I'm a genius, which is pretty funny, way of not dying. But yeah, I think the fact that because of especially because season 6 has the invasion and the war games. It kind of slips under the radar a bit, and also because it has the Dominators and the Crotons. Because in season 6, there was either really good episodes like war games, invasion, and obviously I think Seeds of Death, or you get really bad episodes like the Crotons, the Dominators, which people generally don't seem to like, and then I suppose the Man Robber as well. But yeah, and then for the Third Doctor, this was probably my hardest one to think of, because the Third Doctor is my favourite Doctor, so there's a lot I was thinking, Frontier in Space. Frontier in Space is quite underrated, or Claws of Axos, it's a pretty good one. But ultimately I choose the Colony in Space. I think all around, Season 8 is definitely the most underrated season. Because if I say Jon Pertwee, people's first thoughts are probably the first stories I kind of hear are stories like Inferno or Spearhead from Space, or something like later seasons like Sea Devils or Green Death or The Three Doctors. But I feel like season 8 has some good stories. I think Terror of the Autons is not only is it a great introduction to the Master, is a good sequel to the Autons, to Spearhead from Space. Then Mind of Evil I don't like at all. So yeah. And then Claws of Axos is pretty good. Colony in Space I think is really underrated, and then The Daemons is quite a good story as well. But I just find people don't seem to think of Series 8 all around as a good story. Yeah, but yeah, Colony in Space, it's quite fun. I like the Master in this one, and I think Joe Grant and the Third Doctor, Jon Pertwee's Master, are quite fun and good, and I find they just seem to mesh quite well. And I also quite like the designs of the natives of the planet, not the colonists. The actual natives, their costumes do look quite good. I mean, I know the Draconians are probably the other ones, but there's some costumes from the 70s and 60s and stuff, and the 80s, and there's some of them you could say they look quite silly. Like, I know the big ones are from like Warriors in the Deep with the Merca. Is it the Merca? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I think it all around is a pretty good story. However, some bits are a bit weird, but I like it, and I do think the overarching plot with the mining corporation is pretty interesting. However, it does feel like it's just taking away from the whole thing with the Master. It feels like what they tried to do was something kind of similar to what Day of the Daleks was like, where it is there's a threat going on. Like, this guy had written the story, I can't remember who makes it, it's Malcolm Hulke. Malcolm Hulke wrote this story for Colony in Space. Joe and the Doctor try and save these colonists from the mining corporation. However, then it feels like someone's at BBC was like, oh, you need to incorporate the Master into this somehow. So he's then had to try and add the Master in and try and just mesh it all together. It feels like there's trying to be two different episodes mixed into one story, which makes it, it kind of distracts it. However, I think it was a nice break, because I watched Season 8, quite close together. So by Colony in Space, after watching Terror of the Autons, Claws of Axos, and Mind of Evil, which is 14 episodes. Colony in Space was a nice bit of a refresher, because the Master just doesn't come in straight away. But yeah, enough of Jon Pertwee. On to the Fourth Doctor now. And then obviously the Fourth Doctor's era is massive. You could have many different ones. But I've gone with the Face of Evil, which is nearing the back end of Series 14. It's wedged into... It's put into a series which I find is probably one of Tom Baker's maybe most underrated seasons, because it starts off with Mask of Mandragora and The Hand of Fear, and they're both pretty good stories with Sarah Jane in them. I mean, they're not the best in the world, but they are good. They're not Series 13 or Series 12, but they are very good. Then Deadly Assassins, like the most memorable one of Series 14, and I think a lot of people feel like it's the only good story in Series 14, or Season 14, sorry. And then I think the back end of... Oh, and Talons of Weng-Chiang, obviously. But then I think the two that are forgotten about is Leela's first and second story. Obviously, the second one she's in is The Robots of Death, which I think is one of my favourite Tom Baker stories. Not my favourite, but one of them. But The Face of Evil is a good story. It worked well because it feels like it works well because I have a feeling that if Sarah Jane was in this as a companion, or and he had an established companion already, like if this came in season 17 and Romana was in it or something, it wouldn't have worked as well. It needed to be an episode where the Doctor was by himself without a companion, and then gaining Leela, because some of the whole story wouldn't have really worked. However, one thing I feel like it could have done, which it didn't, was if it was either if it was longer, maybe like 6 parts, or that was the first thing, or either possibly B, it kind of pulled a frontier in space where it was like Planet of the Daleks, where they lead into each other. Then they could have possibly had a bit more of a reasoning behind the whole face thing, because they do seem to explain how the face and how the Doctor met it, but had they met this thing, the face or whatever. But I think it would have been nicer if we'd seen it in the past and it had consequences, a bit like how in The Green Death the Doctor goes to Metebelis 3, steals the Metebelis crystal. Is it Metebelis crystal? Something like that. And then that consequences with the Planet of the Spiders. That has a consequence for Planet of the Spiders, which I think it would have been better. And I also am not sure, but if they do make a novelisation, or they have made a novelisation, I hope it goes more in depth on how the Doctor fixed the computer, which I believe his name is Zoan or something like that. But yeah. So, yeah, but I think it's underrated as story. I think it's a great introduction to Leela. And I think if you haven't watched this one, it's a good story because you get an idea of Leela's evolution a bit easier. She's really savage in this one. She is in The Robots of Death. And in Talons of Weng-Chiang, she's a little bit... But then, as it progresses through Season 15 as well, she seems to become more of a normal... Not a normal person, obviously, but more of a, civilised in the sense. Anyway, for the next one, which is... I feel like I've been doing to death at the moment, is The Visitation. I mean, I don't know what to say. I've done a review of it, and I also kind of looked at the set. The set, it's a good story. It has a couple of flaws, but yeah, it's a good story. If you want to watch a more in-depth review, watch my Visitation review, obviously, which I'm going to keep it short. So yeah, it's a good story. If you haven't watched the story, go watch it. But yeah. Then for the 6th Doctor, there's a couple for the 6th Doctor, because I think he gets a bit of slack because he has a couple of stories which aren't just a little bit bad, then they are really bad, which are like Twin Dilemma and Time Lash, and probably and then like stuff like Trial of the Time Ones 1 to 4, Mysterious Planet, and The Ultimate Foe. But some of those stories do work quite well. Like Attack of the Cybermen's pretty good. Mark of the Rani, and then obviously the one I'm going to choose is Revelation of the Daleks. Now, I know a lot of people don't like this story, and I think a big drawback of this story for people is the guy, whatever he's called, the DJ. A lot of people don't really like him, and I can see why. He's a bit irritating, and his voice is just a bit annoying. However, I find that I can stand him enough and ignore him enough to watch the rest of the story, which is good. I also enjoy the idea of the fact that Davros is on bare bones. He's lost pretty much everything. The Daleks have turned against him. They've needed his help. They've needed his help again, only to trick him again. And he's been running to the ground and he's trying to hide it. He still survives, which is brought up obviously again in like some of the later stories, a bit like Time War and Stolen for Journey's End. Davros seems to die, yet he always survives, and it's like as long as Davros lives, the Daleks will never leave the Doctor alone. And I think, as I'd said, I'd like Eric Zawood a lot. Eric Zawood is probably one of my favourite writers, especially when it comes to 80s. He's probably one of my favourite 80s writers. But what I like about his Doctor, not about his Doctor, sorry, what about his writing is how he also does Earthshock, Resurrection as well, and I think he possibly even does Attack of the Cybermen, but I'm not sure. But what I like about his stories is he just knows how to make established characters scary. Because if you watch this, because sometimes scary, it's not the scary, like conventionally scary, like jump scares and all that. It's just creepy and it's dark and it works well. And this is why Revelation and Resurrection I think is far superior to Remembrance, because Remembrance is funny and like a little bit light-hearted, and it's dark in a couple of places, but it just never hits anywhere near Revelation's darkness. And I don't think the Daleks have ever been this dark ever again. But I think Terry Molloy plays the Davros really well again. I think Terry Molloy is probably one of the better Davros incarnations. He's a lot better than David Goodison, at least from Destiny. But yeah, now in Sylvester McCoy's hero, which is obviously the last one of this video, I've gone with Battlefield. I've gone with Battlefield because it is probably one of his more, I don't know how to say it, but he's kind of one of his stories that slips under the radar a little bit, because it's season 26, and I think for most Doctor Who fans even most Sylvester McCoy diehard fans, is that it's a general consensus that season 26 is his best episode. A lot of people like Survival, because Fenric is generally considered one of his, probably if his best story. I mean, Ghostlight gets mentioned a lot because no one really seems to know what's going on in Ghostlight. But then I find Battlefield slips under the radar a little bit. And as I've said, Pertwee is my favourite Doctor. So maybe I like it a lot because it's a bit of a Pertwee fan show. You've got your Bessie returns, and the Brigadier's back with units. But even take those things away, it still would stand by itself. If Nicholas Courtney hadn't returned, it might have not been as good, but it would still have worked as a story by itself. I also think, as I said with Colony in Space design, I think the Destroyer design looks amazing, and I think especially Jean Marsh plays her role really well. But yeah, I find it slips under the radar a little bit because although season 26 is generally considered his best season, it just no one seems to really talk about it. If I say Sylvester McCoy, people will jump to, most likely will say, oh, Curse of Fenric, Remembrance of the Daleks, Greatest Show in the Galaxy possibly, and then they might mention how Ghostlight, no one really seems to know what's going on in Ghostlight. But yeah, but that's been my top, not my top really, it's been my list of my underrated stories for each Doctor. If you have enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more content. Yeah, please like and subscribe. But yeah, I'll see you.